Well, hello and welcome back to another AIA Canada webinar. Glad to have you all back for another series of the consumer behavior research project here at AIA. This time around, we're going to be focusing on data in the vehicle and really trying to understand the consumer perspective on that very important subject for the future of this industry. And so for today, we're going to welcome back again Rick Nadeau from Chorus Consulting Group, who led this project. So welcome back, Rick. Thank you very much for joining back.
Good morning, good afternoon, JF. Always happy to be part of this type of event.
That's great. And we're also going to have back with us today James Channer from In Motion Brands. Welcome back, James.
Thanks for having me, JF, and always good to see you, Rick.
Likewise.
That's great. I'll take the opportunity to also say congratulations, James. I know you were recently elected to the board of AIA Canada. You're going to continue your contributions with the association. That's great.
Oh, absolutely. Very jazzed about it. Great organization, even better people. Looking forward to it. Thanks for the support, JF, and everyone on the board.
Awesome. So before we get going, I'll obviously be remiss if we didn't acknowledge our sponsors for this event. And so again, thank you for your ongoing generosity. All these organizations continue to support us financially so we can not only have these webinars as we have today, but also being able to have all these research projects that continue to provide insights for the industry. So I'm going to dive right into the first segment for today's presentation. And we're going to let Rick basically present the finding first, and we'll have a bit of a conversation and Q&A afterwards. So up to you, Rick.
Perfect, JF. Thank you. So before we dip our toes into the data pool, just important to communicate to everyone how this data was collected. So again, a reminder that this is based on a total of 2,000 surveys that were completed with Canadian vehicle owners. A survey that was completed about a year ago, actually, early June 2021, the findings of which, of course, have fed into the whole series of reports and webinars we've been doing over the past year. So important for everyone to know where this data is coming from now into the exciting stuff at JF. So we want to kick off this webinar here by, I guess, initially understanding what's the lay of the land in terms of consumer awareness around in-car data, around who owns the data that their vehicle produces, how confident do they feel they are aware of the different types of data that's being produced, and how much of that data is in fact being produced. And the first data points, as we see here up on the slide, clearly shows that there's a pretty low level of awareness and understanding of the who owns the data, what data is produced, and how much of that data is produced. Just barely over 1 out of 4 Canadian vehicle owners feeling confident they're aware of all of these things. And if memory serves me correctly, it's barely 1 out of 10 who feel strongly, who feel very confident they understand each of these particular dynamics. If we dig a little bit deeper on the next slide here around the who, right? Who has access? Who owns the data around who owns the data their vehicle is producing? We kind of approached this in an interesting way. We first asked vehicle owners, who do you think owns the data? And the first, JF's going to flip our little magic animation here. We see here that it's a little bit all over the proverbial map, right? 34% of vehicle owners think that they own that data. They think 30% think the manufacturer owns that, and 21% just have no idea. Then if we ask them, well, who do you think should own that data? Well, we get a bit of a clearer picture there. 3/4 of vehicle owners are pretty certain that they're the ones who should have their mitts on their own vehicle data, and then very low numbers for other stakeholders, if you will. So that's kind of the initial lay of the land. It helps us understand, obviously, that there's quite a bit of confusion around who, in fact, owns the data, a very low level of confidence around understanding what data is even produced. So over to James. James, what do you think of all this? Does this surprise you that there is this low level of awareness and understanding around in-car data?
Not surprising, Rick. When we look at the broader sensitivity of data that we've all kind of grown up here over the last decade or so, in other industries, smartphones, our personal data online. Consumers are very slow to act and really increase their level of awareness unless there is push of information and clarity. And we have to just be very sensitive of who's pushing that information to consumers, because currently today, OE manufacturers and the dealership network have done a better job than us in terms of getting their points and interests across. And that really speaks to why we all collectively in the aftermarket have to rally behind the AIA and industry collectively to help consumers better understand the data that's in their vehicle and for them to take more ownership.
Well, it's very interesting and always to see that dynamics playing out for sure. Thank you, Rick, for the information. Thanks for the commentary, James. We also got some questions, I guess, from the audience in advance of today's event. So one quick question that got from the audience is, an important question to ask is whether independent auto service providers are interested, in getting the consumer data and how are they going to use it? And the question is, have you researched their behavior, attitudes, and aspiration? I don't think we asked the question, Rick, but James, you might have a bit of an insight in that question.
Yeah, from the ASPs that we work with and speak to, this is absolutely critical for them to be able to have access to that onboard vehicle data with respect to servicing and repair. We all know the level of complexity of today's vehicles. There's more software code in those vehicles that's in a space shuttle. And so with this level of advancement of technology, the ASPs are hungry not only to get that information and access to information, because they want to be able to complete those services and maintenance repairs confidently for vehicle owners. And so in terms of their research and behaviors, attitudes, it may not be at the forefront of their minds today, which we can talk about why, but clearly it's going to become increasingly more important as the years go by, for sure.
Well, thank you very much, James. Let's dive right into our second segment. It's going to be about the perspective of consumers and interest in engagement in relations into in-car data. So again, back to you, Rick, to share the results of the research. Rick?
Thank you, JF. So just as that first segment clearly helped us understand the level of awareness in the market around in-car data, it doesn't necessarily mean that consumers care about this data, or do they? And this is what our next set of questions helped us understand. And once there is a level of interest, then in learning about a little bit more about their vehicle, in-vehicle data, then who do they see as educating them around that? So first of all, do consumers care? And this is what our first set of data points here clearly helps us appreciate, is that there is in fact a healthy level of engagement among vehicle owners when it comes to who controls that data and how much data their vehicle produces. So clearly at that first point, 65% would in fact like to better understand who controls the data their vehicle produces, which of course the 65% is an encouraging number for the industry. It's nice to see that there is engagement around that. I would actually draw some attention to that 35% as well, who are not engaged, and what's going on in their minds there around why aren't they in fact concerned about who controls their data. And then of course the 56% who would like to better understand how much data their vehicle produces. On the next slide, JF, to add to this point, to bolster the argument that consumers are in fact engaged around this particular issue, we fully have 74%, so 3 out of 4 vehicle owners who, these people, it never would have even occurred to them before they participated in this survey that it is in fact, they wouldn't have even thought about thinking about it. Wouldn't even have thought about their own in-car vehicle data. And this same proportion feels that it's important that somebody out there proactively provide this information to them. So again, a fairly high level of engagement around wanting to find out more. Who should be providing more information on the next slide? Well, we didn't explore every possibility out there. That the list would have been pretty long, but we did explore specifically, is there a sense that consumers feel that OEMs should be doing more? And is there a sense that the government should be doing more? So 80% there agreeing that OEMs should be doing more. 68% believe that this is a role that the government should be playing. So again, what we're starting to see now, James, right? There was a low level of understanding initially. There's now a high level of engagement. There's a high level of interest in finding out more about in-vehicle data. Some of your thoughts around that?
The survey, continues to underline and validate what I'm hearing and my team hears with speaking with ASPs on a regular basis, is that they're concerned and they're struggling with how to make that impact to help their customers become more aware. Because consumers today, as your survey supports, they really don't get it, which really speaks to our opportunity here as industry to really push and create more consumer awareness. Because if I'm a vehicle owner and I go to my automotive service provider in the aftermarket and they're telling me, hey, they can't access certain information, I'm going to then say, hey, I'll take your vehicle to, the OE dealership. We're presenting the OE dealer as a solution. That's exactly what they want. And so clearly we've got to really understand the motivations and from the OE perspective, they're highly motivated. Many statistics have demonstrated over the last several years, their service bays have continued to decline in terms of demand, and we've seen an increased demand from the automotive aftermarket. So thumbs up on what we're doing on that side, everyone out there, and consumers trust us. And so we collectively as industry got to continue to think about how we arm ASPs to help in that communication and awareness to consumers, because again, as the survey demonstrates, they're a little lost and they need some direction.
James, I want to drill down a bit into, because I think this is a very telling statistics. 80% will say, I think it's the responsibility of the car manufacturers to provide that information. And clearly, to your point, they're not very motivated to necessarily make it more obvious. They want to drive more business to their base, and they're challenged to do that. But also share with you that we're finding the same problematic when we're speaking to elected officials, members of parliament, that too are not very aware about all that changing dynamic in the vehicle, and that's worrisome. James, your perspective, can we do more to educate the ASPs so they can in fact tell the consumer how do we make that number of people aware of it grow faster?
Absolutely. It's on all of us to really align ourselves and organize more clearly and succinctly than we have in the past. Because, hey, let's be real. There's so many great independent service centers out there, ASPs out there, but they're in their businesses every day. They're doing such a great job in meeting today's demands. We collectively as industry, and I mean we collectively, they're jobbers, they're suppliers that are larger organizations. We have to be thinking strategically more long-term on how do we equip our customers, these ASPs, to help them sustain their success long-term. And this right for repair and this who owns the data discussion, we really need to fuel ASPs with more access to information, more resources, because when they're having those one-on-one conversations, they need to then begin to help educate their customers on how important it is for them to understand what's happening with the data in their vehicle. So it's a collective effort that needs to happen, JF, and clearly the AIA is leading the way, but the AIA needs more resources, more people on the street. So I'm a big proponent in us in industry getting more aligned and organized.
Yeah, very well said, James. I want to just maybe queue up a question we got in advance of today's webinar, and it reads, auto manuals and sales contracts are silent as to data ownership, privacy, location, etc. Do you see this, changing? And back again to this bigger conversation of disclosure and access to information. Do we think this is going to change, James?
Come on, let's be real. If the OEs have no motivation to provide access, unless they're required with some type of enforcement, because as the data has been showing, not only have they seen a significant decrease in actual new car sales, they're also seeing a significant decrease in Canadian consumers going to their service space. More and more Canadian consumers are choosing the automotive service providers in the aftermarket. And so what that says is their defense is going to be to protect their interests. And that means the data. The data is so valuable to them. They're putting in measures and tactics to protect that data. And that's a concern for us in the automotive aftermarket for sure. I don't see that changing without enforcement of legislation, and that legislation doesn't really change until consumers and public as a whole, makes that a priority. And so that's where we can come in, both legislatively and what the AIA is doing, which is great. We'll hear more about that in today's webinar, but also we've got to help consumers understand why this is important.
It's fascinating how that conversation always leads to the right to repair conversation and the need. There's a comment that came live. I'm just going to read it. Comment from the audience is, automakers and dealers refuse to disclose how many sensors are in the vehicle and what each does, despite asking many times. So there's really this movement through the OEMs to protect that information and not make it, readily available, I guess. I was going to put Rick on the spot a bit. Some of your research, I know you work with consumer groups all the time, and it's not always automotive, but other sector of the economy. And I'm suspecting the whole conversation about data is not particular just to our industry. Is there something you could share in terms of your experiences and, how do you get a segment of the populations to be more understanding, more aware of these changes that is going to impact them down the road?
Well, it's actually a really good question. A lot of research has been done around privacy and data, what's being produced, who owns it, how's it being used. It's led to interesting changes in various industry, whether it's how Apple designs its phones, all the way to how research companies like mine manage research that we collect through surveys and other forms of data collection mechanisms. And the interesting dynamics around data for sure is that there's certainly a growing concern around what data consumers produce, whether it's when they simply swipe their credit card at a local shop, or when they buy a ticket to the movie theater through their cell phone apps. There's a growing awareness and appreciation for that data in certain contexts. There's no denying there's a slice of Canadians, they typically tend to be a little younger. There's just much less concern about that data being out there. I mean, they are quite comfortable going onto Facebook and putting all sorts of information out there, devil be damned, and care be damned, I should say, sorry. And then you have these other segments, obviously, who are becoming more interested in the data that's out there, which is all the more interesting as to why, when we look at our results for automotive, why there is, in fact, this huge contingent of Canadian vehicle owners who aren't even aware of the data that's being produced. So it's kind of the whole new world that's being opened up to them in terms of making them aware of a new source of data, a new type of data that they are, in fact, producing and that somebody else is, in fact, controlling. And so there's a whole new conversation that needs to happen around there in a world where Canadians are, in fact, quite aware that they are producing data and they want some control over that.
Yeah, very well said, Rick. Thank you for that commentary. Another comment came from the audience here that reads that OEMs repeatedly claim they collect private personal information only with the explicit consent from car owners. So implying that somewhere probably in the small prints, there are some legalese that would say that the consumers has agreed to share or give that information access to OEMs. I think we all agree that we're going to continue to see those positions that says no, it's somewhere buried into the small print, and I don't think that's enough to really bring the level of awareness and understanding from consumer. I think, do we all agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Quick story here that I just heard the other day. ASP was completing a repair on a particular type of vehicle and had to purchase that particular part from the OE. When they made that purchase to the OE, that OE manufacturer emailed the customer the details of the part and the cost of that part from what that ASP had just recently purchased. That's what's happening. And so not only are we talking about who controls the data, it's what is their motivation with that information and how are they using that information to shape and control what consumers ultimately choose. This is really the battle that that's going on behind the scenes, and I can appreciate ASPs don't struggle with this on a day-to-day basis because they're in their businesses. But folks like the AIA and other industry ambassadors are continuing to strive to help protect our interests, not only today but into tomorrow.
Well, that's great. Thank you very much, James. Lots of questions, lots of comment. Please keep them bringing. We're obviously going to circle back also at the end with our global Q&A. So let's move to a section or segment 3, which is all about the potential for action. And once again, I'm going to turn it over to Rick to share some of his findings. Rick?
Sure. So I think some of the results we're going to look at dovetail nicely with a lot of the conversation that's been happening so far in this webinar, which is once you start equipping consumers with information, once you start educating them around the types of data that are produced and how much data and what they can ultimately do with that data, then they can start taking some informed decisions around that particular data. So that's what this segment here is all about. Is given that knowledge, what would they be prepared to do? What would they be interested in doing? So our first slide here is actually quite telltale and obviously extremely relevant to our audience here today, is that fully 49%, 1 out of 2 vehicle owners believe they would be more proactive in maintaining their vehicle if they were more familiar with the type and amount of data their vehicle produces. So clearly, a shout out there to the industry that the more their customers are aware of what their vehicle produces, they're going to be more proactive, which is perfect for the industry, obviously. Other actions that consumers might be interested, other scenarios in which consumers might be interested. On the next slide, we explored, again, a variety of scenarios. There's interest in sharing some of that information with insurance companies to kind of reduce their premiums. There's interest in sharing that with government. There's interest in sharing that with retailers. But of particular, and that's the gold box on the upper left-hand side there on the screen, is there again the value in for the industry in making sure consumers understand the data their vehicle is producing. 3/4 of vehicle owners would be interested. They would be interested in wirelessly transmitting certain vehicle diagnostics to their regular ASP to keep them updated on repair and maintenance timelines. The number goes down a little bit to 68% in terms of sharing that diagnostic data with their local dealership. So again, the key thing that I'm pulling away from this, right, is again, as you put a little bit more control into the vehicle owner's hands around what data they are producing, how they can use that data, then you can start seeing a little even more engagement around using that to their benefit, ultimately, right? It's just staying on top of M&R, helping them with their insurance premiums, so on and so forth. So again, that's it for this segment. To get quick thoughts there, James, on these findings.
I just love these findings. It's a continuation of what we saw in the last consumer behavior with respect to M&R, maintenance and repair, and what consumers, vehicle owners had been saying between dealerships and ASPs. And they said about ASPs, consumers have a high level of trust with ASPs. But what they were concerned about is their ability in terms of having the technology, the training to be able to perform certain types of services. Again, this is part of the playbook. OEs are doing in holding that data. Because again, consumers are saying, if you gave me the control, yes, I would want to give that data, give that information to ASPs because I trust them. We go to the same, our kids go to the same schools, we go to the same churches, we live in the same communities. That's a strength of ours. And so we just collectively have to utilize that strength to put more emphasis on the importance both for consumers and then our government officials with respect to getting them more control of their own data would be beneficial.
Great insights, Rick and James. And again, just validating the fact that when giving the choice, Canadian consumers continue to choose the aftermarket as their first choice for the maintenance and repair of their vehicle, which is great. But obviously, without control of the data, this may change. This may be ahead or behind, but we continue to have some great feedback online. And the comment was, how is the movement towards EVs is going to impact this? And maybe, James, is that related to EVs really, or is it just simply because the evolution of the car, regardless of the type of drivetrain, is data going to be the bigger player in this whole thing rather than the electrifications of the vehicle? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. Recently, I just had a conversation with a ASP owner, Emily Chung from Auto Niche in Markham. She's a client of ours, and we were talking about the same subject because she shared with me an article that she was highlighted in and provided some comments for the CBC. And if we get that opportunity to share that after this session, because I gave it to the team here just a few minutes ago. But I love what she said in there when she talked about the powered engines today versus EVs of the future. Engines today, they're all pretty much the same, just the plumbing around it's differently. I'm kind of quoting her from the article. But EVs, every OE has a whole completely different engineering structure of EVs. And so the importance of providing access to their own information in terms of their electrical vehicle design is going to be critical for the future sustainability of our industry and providing that consumer choice. And when you really think about the challenge that we have in skills trade, if that information isn't shared, how do we ask trade schools and the trainers out there to actually teach individuals who want to get into our industry if the information isn't easily accessible? So this has significant ramifications throughout and will touch every particular element of the industry, from labor to skill development to performing maintenance and repairs and giving consumers choice. A lot of layers here, JF, a lot of layers.
Absolutely. And a good mention of that recent article a couple days ago with the CBC, who highlighted this whole dynamics around EVs, and we'll hopefully be able to post this in the chat before the end of today's event. I always like to use the example. There's recently regulations got passed in Europe about standardizing the connectors that goes into mobile device. And while we all like our iPhones and the technology was driven by that organization, the reality is we don't want people to be throwing out all sorts of accessories, higher costs, less convenience, simply because one chosen to design it in a slightly different ways that doesn't really provide any added benefit, right? So standardizations around the USB-C standard, I think, is a good example. We see that can reduce waste, improve way that people get trained on the product and be able to service them down the road as well. A good question also came through the chat here that says, how can ASPs reassure vehicle owners that their data is safe with them, that they will not be hacked? What do ASP have to do now to get prepared for that upcoming future? James?
I'll certainly start. Rick, please chime in with any additional comments. I think it kind of touches on, I go back to this series of the consumer behaviors that we've been sharing throughout the last year. It's all about our impressions that consumers have about us. If we have locations that have strong brand and image, if our operations and the training that we're invest in is demonstrated, if we're deploying new technologies to make doing business with us easier and more convenient, then will just generate and deliver that level of confidence to Canadian consumers. And so I would say that the way that we can really, breed confidence to vehicle owners that we want to do business with is to demonstrate that we're technologically savvy, that we're deploying functions and features that make doing business easy with us, like online booking that was mentioned in the last study. If we're not keeping up with what many other industries are doing to make business much easier and convenient to engage, then that's where the questions and the uncertainties start to lie. And so it's really for up to all of us, not just those advanced, progressive operators that are out there. It's time for the tides to rise, all ASPs, for us to get in the game on all fronts.
Thank you. Rick, you can, obviously through all that research, we talked about the level of trust, I guess, right? The consumer has trust into the local ASPs. And, as they're trying to get prepared to better protect their data, I guess it's all going to be about trust, I think, and that perceptions that the ASPs are prepared and able to protect the information from the consumers, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. We've actually done quite a bit of research around cybersecurity, speaking to both small and medium-sized business owners and consumers around that. And I mean, by default, consumers will look at a business that they do business with as being trustworthy from a data protection perspective. They don't go to their local second cup and wonder, gee, I'm going to buy this cup of coffee with my credit card. I wonder if my data is secure. They say they would have a kind of a default reaction in a similar way to when they go to their ASP or to their dealership. Their primary concern will be, of course, competence and technical ability to repair their vehicle and to maintain their vehicle. They don't go in there wondering, should I pull into this bay because I'm not sure my data is going to be safe. Obviously, as the world evolves, as data becomes a bigger part of the M&R picture, and as consumers become increasingly aware that their vehicle produces data, maybe it will start crawling a bit more into the forefront of their concerns. But right now, that's not where concerns for consumers lie. And that being said, there are certainly some measures that small, medium-sized business owners can take to reassure businesses on that front. There are audits that they can undertake. There are certifications that they can present. I think quite recently, in fact, again, Government of Canada introduced a cyber secure program that allows small and medium-sized businesses to obtain a certification demonstrating that they are, in fact, cyber secure, and that is with the full intent of making that consumer facing and reassure them on that particular front. An example among many out there, in fact.
Great, thank you. Great insight. I want to also talk about some of the questions we received in advance of today's webinar. This one reads: how can vehicle owners know which component makers or third-party suppliers receive personal information? It's not just about the car itself, but the various parts and who has made those parts that might be able to receive that personal information as well. Any insight you might have on that, James?
I think that just kind of goes part and parcel to what we've been talking about, that OEs, the manufacturers themselves, have been very reluctant to share and make accessible this level of data, even to this specific question. And so how can vehicle owners know? The only way vehicle owners are going to know if the manufacturer provides that level of transparency. Are they going to do it voluntarily? We in the industry believe, based on past experiences with OEs, that they're not necessarily going to make this type of information and be completely transparent to this specific question or to the broader question of who owns the data, unless there's some type of enforcement, because it's in their interest to keep that data as secure and only make it accessible to whom they want to make it accessible with, to continue to protect their own interest. And I would say that's not in the best interest of consumers.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very well said. So, gentlemen, we're obviously looking at all that dynamic, and one I have to ask, I'm sorry, I'm just keeping an eye here as well from another question that came on. A good question. I recently had work done at an ASP, and the service showed up on the Carfax app. Is my data being sold? And I know that for some of you that monitor this, there is some exchange of information that provides for a better consumer experience. And sometimes people, questions if our ASP in the aftermarket, in fact, how they're showing that information. I'm not sure if, James, you have some insight about that business model or not.
Yeah, I can't really speak specifically to the Carfax business model, but clearly providing information on services that were performed, keeping track of that, that's important to a vehicle owner, which again was brought up in the last report that was completed. Consumers are saying that they'd like help in managing their maintenance and repair on their vehicles, and so Carfax is providing some type of solution to assist consumers in that. Why? Well, because there's a gap. And so we as industry, ASPs have to become much more proactive in how we're doing business with our customers, having those conversations about putting together a maintenance plan that suits their priorities, how long they're keeping the vehicle. If we're not having those questions, if we're not having those conversations rather, and asking those questions, we're really leaving ourselves open. And so to me, JF, it's all about transparency. It's all about really good communication with your customers, and then letting them know where you're looking and how we collectively should be accessing that information, so I can help you keep that vehicle on the road for its engineered life, because that's going to save you tens of thousands of dollars over the years. There's a trust there that consumers already have with us. We just have to have those right conversations and begin that planning to help protect their interests.
Well said. Thank you, gentlemen. We're moving now to segment 4, which is on right to repair. That's clearly one of the most important issues for our industry. And as we know in Canada, right to repair is currently a voluntary agreement. It isn't legislated, and it's something that we are actively pursuing and advocating for here at AIA. But let's first hear from Rick about what the research says on this. Rick?
Perfect. So there's actually a little bit more information here, a little bit more data around this, because we need to peel away at this a little bit. Right to repair is not something that's front and center in the consumer's mind. So when we explored this in our survey, we had to kind of take it in levels here. So the first thing that was important to understand from a consumer perspective is had you even heard of telematics systems before participating in this survey? So when you start using technical industry-specific jargon like that, it always gets consumers a little bit rattled. 17% had heard the term telematics system. Doesn't mean they understood necessarily what that all was. And so through the survey, again, we gave them a little bit more information about what telematics data is, what a telematics system is. And based on that information, 60% are telling us that they would in fact consider that kind of information to be personal information, which of course has implications in terms of how they view the importance of that data, the relevance of that data, and the steps that stakeholders need to take to protect and use that data. So already we're starting to get a little bit of information around the relevance of telematics data. Then what we did on the next slide here is again try to get some specific data around, well, do consumers even know that the OEMs who put these systems in vehicles, that by default, they are the ones who own and control that data? 1 out of 5 are telling us that they were aware of this. Are they even aware that this has implications on the aftermarket? 12% were aware that local chains and independent service shops cannot access telematics data the same way that manufacturers can. So again, we're already with these very foundational basic building blocks around consumer awareness of understanding, getting a clear sense that education will need to be an important part of whatever right to repair initiatives the industry or the association chooses to take. The next set of questions, basically, again, we're building on this, and we're trying to get a sense of, well, if we present the consumers with specific kinds of scenarios, how acceptable or unacceptable do they in fact consider these types of scenarios? The first one being, well, this very first scenario, which is, well, what if OEMs have controlled by default? Without giving them more kind of consequences or implications around this, what percent of consumers find that scenario acceptable versus unacceptable? Clearly, almost a majority, 47%, just they look at that scenario and they feel this is either not very or not at all acceptable. 22% find this acceptable. And then what we chose to do through the survey is layer in a little bit more information bit by bit. Okay, so OEMs have control by default. Now, on the next slide, what if this means you might have to go to your dealership for maintenance and repair? Again, because the aftermarket would not have equal access to the required diagnostic data. How acceptable is this scenario? Well, suddenly now we start seeing the level of unacceptability climbing. It's 59%, 16% considering it acceptable, 1 out of 5 there sitting on the fence. So again, once we start meddling with, in some sense, meddling with consumer power, the ability for the consumer to make a choice, whether or not they would go to the dealership anyway, is irrespective here. What we're starting to understand is that when you start explaining to consumers that your choice as a consumer is in fact impacted by this, the level of unacceptability, if that's even a word, starts to increase. Then the next scenario, and the last one we presented here, was, well, what if this also means that you, as the vehicle owner, as the consumer, cannot directly access or manage this data? The level of or the proportion of vehicle owners who consider that unacceptable now goes to 62%, with 13% feeling that, well, it doesn't matter to them. It's neither here nor there for them. They still consider that acceptable. So with all of these different pieces in place, we're now in a position in the survey anyway to present a scenario, present a question to consumers around their level of support for an open system platform. So this is the final slide in our survey results for this section. The question being, as it is presented on the slide there, how likely would you be to support a requirement to equip all vehicles that use telematics systems with a standardized open access data platform? You can see there, green light, 66% support that kind of an initiative. 22%, again, were kind of indifferent, sitting on the fence, and 12% would not support. Would love to have those people in a focus group room to kind of peel away at what the reactions to all this was. Maybe they're reacting to the open access part of the question. Maybe they're thinking that this is open to everyone and anyone and that there's no control. Hard to really pinpoint why some people would actually oppose this in any particular way. But anyhow, suffice to say that there would in fact be a fair degree of consumer support for a standardized open access data platform. So that's it for the consumer data part of all this. James, a lot of interesting survey results here around specifically telematics systems, specifically R2R, right to repair. How do you think this all kind of fits with what we've been talking about?
It's staggering, absolutely staggering. We all have a bank card from the particular bank that we do business with. But I can take my bank card and go to any bank machine, regardless if TD doesn't own that bank machine. I can get money from my TD bank account from any bank machine. That's what we're talking about here. And to me, all this requires, and I know it's a simple statement, it's the education and awareness, but we all have a role to play. ASPs need assistance to have these conversations and provide some of this type of data to their customers that they're doing business with. So anybody that's doing business with ASPs today, tire distributors, parts suppliers, the jobbers, we all collectively have a role to play here in educating the public on the current standard that we're operating in, where this information isn't accessible and the consumer is not in control. Otherwise, there's going to be grave consequences in the years to come as the advancement of technologies in vehicles continue to climb. You can hear my passion, because this is a passionate subject that I think we all need to get behind.
That's great. There's a couple of questions that were asked by the audience live here, a little bit more precise related to the research. The first one, Rick, is a question about, did we make differentiations between telematics data or an applications they might have on a cell phone to access the information on their car? I don't know if you actually were specific in some of the questions you asked, trying to parse telematics data versus an app versus different type of information. Did you?
No. So in the early set of questions where we explored just general in-car data, that was globally encompassed any and all types of data that a vehicle might produce. So whether it's a particular technology platform that a person might be using for navigation or for choosing what music they want to play in their vehicle, also including telematics. The latter set of questions, which is this much more recent set of charts that I've presented, that was specific to telematics data. So it did not include app-based type of data.
There's also an interesting aspect, because often people don't think about where that information is stored. And for the most part, that information today does not get stored in Canada. Did we ask a question specific, or educated the, because again, very low level of understanding from your respondent. So you have to provide some background information. Any mention of the fact that some of that information is most likely stored outside of Canada? Was that part of the question as well?
No, it was not, Jeff. Well, it's obviously another important dynamic to data ownership. Again, as a research shop, we have a lot of data, and it's important for us to stipulate where our data is stored and how that is in fact managed. So, but no, in the survey, it was not specifically explored.
Okay, thank you. And James, I know, as you said, very, very passionate. I love your example about the fact that, we are able to use different type of cell phones and a different network, access different, bank account informations through different platforms and all that. So I guess there is, once it's used and understood by the consumer, a higher level of acceptance to that mobility of data. Do you think if people were more aware of the fact that that information in the car, the telematics data, is actually stored on a US or European or German-based or Asian-based supply, do you think the perception would be different?
Absolutely. I think that's going to certainly play a role in it. And what we're talking about here is the more broader role that we in industry need to play in assisting consumers in this path of education and awareness. And where I see a significant opportunity is us industry working with ASPs, these independent service providers that are doing a great job in meeting the demands to provide maintenance and repair services to the Canadian public. We as industry need to help equip them with resources, insights, information, content, whatever it might be, to help them educate customers, because they're talking to them every single day and they've already got the trust. And so imagine if there was a mechanism where there was one clear messaging that we as industry put into the hands of ASPs and said, hey, we know you're independent, but this involves you. Play a role in communicating and educating customers. Again, I think that's one step that needs to happen, and that would be a powerful step if we could get organized that way.
Absolutely, thank you. I need to bring up one question that was received in advance, and I think it's a loaded question. And that one reads, can a voluntary solution work, or does it require legislation? Because fundamentally, right to repair in Canada is again a voluntary agreement to this point, and we are at AIA very active in advocating for legislations. So I think to answer that part of your questions on whether or not we can have a voluntary solution, I've actually asked our Senior Director of Government Relations at AIA, I've asked Alana Baker to basically join us for a quick second here. So I know, Alana, it's a big question, the whole dynamics around right to repair and legislative. So Alana, do we need a legislative solution?
Sure. Thanks, JF. So let me get right to the point. Voluntary compliance leads to suboptimal results. Period. Full stop. Any solution that's based on the notion of voluntary compliance and individual responsibility is not going to lead to the envisioned and desired results. It will not achieve the goal as intended. In fact, we've seen it firsthand that some notable auto manufacturers have refused to join the current voluntary agreement between automakers and the aftermarket, which undermines the agreement's effectiveness. We've also seen this in other sectors and in jurisdictions around the world that show that attempts to regulate through voluntary compliance simply don't work, and the rates of compliance are alarmingly low. So voluntary agreements or memorandums of understanding, if you will, are simply legally non-binding expressions of goodwill. And these types of agreements will not result in meeting the policy objectives. Rather, in order to achieve the desired outcome for right to repair and ensure that it makes sense ultimately for this industry, any such attempt must be based on legislative measures with a proper and strong enforcement mechanism in place that holds automakers accountable and also liable for any violations. I would say that importantly, accountability and liability represent two key aspects of leading best practices and policy approaches. So these have to be taken into consideration. And this will also ensure that we can close any longstanding loopholes with the current agreement that's in place. It is worth mentioning that Canadians agree and support right to repair legislation. Research shows that 83% of Canadians agree or strongly agree that automakers should be required by law to share data with independent auto shops so they can fix their car. So for a truly open and fair and competitive Canadian automotive aftermarket to continue to exist, consumers need to be protected by legislation to reflect the new reality of vehicles in Canada and give the aftermarket direct, remote, and real-time access to diagnostic data and to the vehicle itself.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Elena, for joining us briefly and being able to answer that particular question. And I guess I'll make a call to all to say, please get involved. This is an ongoing, obviously, debate and battle that we're fighting here at AIA. We are going to be sharing Elena's contact information in the chat. So if you have further questions, wanted to be engaged, participate in some of our grassroots engagement activities, please don't hesitate to work and reach out to Elena so we could all collectively move forward. I don't know, any comment from you, James or Rick, as we heard from Elena?
Yeah, I'll start. You asked me first. No, again, she's absolutely bang on with respect to, I love the words accountability and transparency. That's what we would need with legislation to provide consumers the protection necessary to empower them to give them the choice that consumers want. We need to do education clearly. It's great what Alan is doing and the AIA and those grassroots efforts. But there's other roles that we can play as industry to help move this cause forward. And I see an opportunity to educate ASPs as well. And as I said earlier, and to give them some information and some tools to have some of those conversations that they're either not having right now with their customers or, but certainly I'm the ones that I talk to would certainly be confident in having them if they could get a little bit of help. So I think collectively, we just got to come together a little bit more and empower everyone to give consumers the choice they deserve.
That's great. One more question came is how can a startup already working on this topic of data access and telematics can help ASPs? James, any insights that, we're seeing obviously new innovators, new entrants in the industry trying to find some solution to this problem, can they help ASPs? Do you think there's business model for new entrants in that space?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the point that I made before, just more broadly with respect to working with ASPs, that, we're dealing with businesses that have owners that are wearing a lot of hats. And so there are particular aspects of their business, being technology. They typically don't have an IT manager, digital marketing, websites. They typically don't have these individuals on staff. And so who are they talking to get those referrals? They're talking to industry suppliers and partners that they do business with on a regular basis. And so, again, this is my call out to industry as a whole. If you're a supplier, a job, or doing business with ASPs, your teams need to be looking at the innovators in the industry, having conversations with them and figuring out who should I be introducing to my customers, just so they're aware. I'm not talking about selling them something new, just so their level of awareness and understanding continues to rise with respects to the business behind the business. And that's what they need help with. That's what I see every day.
Right. And Rick, you already made mention earlier that there has been some program launched by the government also to help the small businesses in this country to also accelerate their understanding of cybersecurity and being able to secure the data. And I guess that's another way that ASP can seek, I guess, to get some help.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to echo James's comments, that these individuals are wearing multiple hats. They are aware that data is the next big thing. They have to be aware of this, but there's very low confidence that they know how to package that data, how to make sure that data is in fact secure. The cybersecurity is one among so many different topics that they need to kind of wrap their heads around. It's something that's always changing, and that's something that they struggle with as well, as kind of the ever evolving nature of things like cybersecurity. So they are clamoring for help and support in that area for sure.
Absolutely. Thank you. One more comment that came through the live chat today. Thank you for all these great comment and feedback. It was important to talk about the loopholes that have been put around right to repair, specifically from the like of Kia and Subaru in Massachusetts. And just for everyone's knowledge, there has been in Massachusetts a upgrade, I guess, to the right to repair legislation. There is legislation that exists in Massachusetts, and through a ballot question, a referendum question, that law was expanded to also include telematics. It's currently in front of the courts, but during the whole this whole battle, essentially the likes of Kia and Subaru self-elected to simply turn off all of their telematics system in new cars sold in the state of Massachusetts. It really shows that it's a very dynamic and fluid environment in which we operate right now, for sure. James, again, how do you think we could mobilize more of our ASPs on the issues of right to repair? How do we get members of parliament in those ASP locations to be more familiarized and understanding of that dynamic? Any suggestions you may want to share with the group?
Yeah, organize and strategize and multiply our numbers. And so that means getting involved with local associations that are representing the automotive aftermarket and getting involved in the AIA, joining the news, accessing the newsletter, where a lot of information is shared in terms of grassroots efforts, and take a little bit of a step forward in taking an active role as an ASP. Talking to your fellow, your supplier networks, the companies you do a lot of business with. If I'm an ASP, I would ask them, what are you doing to protect my interest, to ensure that consumers have choice to choose me, not just today, 2 years from now. And that really kind of brings this dialogue together where we're all in the same boat collectively here in the aftermarket. So I would say from ASPs, ask those questions from your suppliers, seek a little bit more involvement, make sure that you're connected with the AIA, and certainly I'm very confident more and more grassroots opportunities will be out there. And as long as we can make ASPs aware of them and equip them, I'm confident that they'll also take up the baton and run with us here on this cause.
Well, what a great way to close this. Listen, gentlemen, this is all the time we have left, but I want to take the opportunity to, again, thank you, Rick, for joining us as always. Thank you, James, for your comment. Always a pleasure to have you presenting the results of these research project. Once again, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, JF.
So stay posted. You're going to get an email following this webinar with a link to download the full report. You're also going to get a link to a survey. So we'd like to hear your feedback about this webinar and the research project as well. Stay connected with AIA. And until next time, well, take care.